There are numerous ghost stories and hauntings associated with the English Civil War, from battlefields to pubs, from castles to ghostly leaders. The Civil War, a series of brutal battles and strategic campaigns fought across the nation between 1642 and 1649. The result was some of the most horrific and bloody times in the UK's history. On one side were the Cavaliers, the royalist forces fiercely loyal to King Charles I, who believed he had a divine right to rule, without Parliament if needed. In opposition were the parliamentarians, fighting for democracy, led by Oliver Cromwell, a name that still divides opinion over 300 years after his death. Although the conflict led to the trial and execution of King Charles I as a traitor and the creation of the only English republic to date, it must be remembered that these wars divided hearts, families, friends, and left immense sadness and suffering in their wake. It also left numerous ghosts. Today, we are not just going to look at stories of ghostly soldiers, but apparitions linked to power, theft, love, betrayal, murder and loss from this fascinating but brutal era. Welcome to the ghosts of the English Civil War. Edgehill is arguably one of the most haunted battlefields in England. It is not uncommon to witness ghost hunters, both serious and sceptical, positioned overlooking the plain, hoping to see the bizarre ghostly manifestations connected with this spot for centuries. On the 23rd of October, 1642, the first major battle was fought at Edgehill. King Charles I, with an army of around 13,000 men, led by Charles's nephew, Prince Rupert of the Rhine, clashed with the parliamentary force, commanded by the Earl of Essex, who believed that the king was a tyrant. Fierce hand-to-hand combat was as bitter as the icy cold wind that day, and roughly 1,500 men had lost their lives by the end of the battle. The outcome of the clash was largely inconclusive. Neither side technically won, but both were quick to claim victory. Just 2 months later, on the 23rd of December, 3 shepherds checking on their flocks at Edgehill claimed they'd witnessed a phantom reenactment of the battle. Specifically, it began with the unmistakable sounds of distant drums, which grew ever nearer, accompanied by the disturbing groans of soldiers as they breathed their last. Then, in the air above the battlefield, appeared a dazzling bright light, and the same incorporeal soldiers that made those clamours. Astonished, the ghostly armies engaged in a full-scale clash before their eyes. The shepherds, as they heard the horses' hooves, cries of command, sounds of muskets, and saw men falling, were convinced their last hour on earth had arrived. As the ghostly battle ended, the terrified shepherds raced to the nearby village of Kyneton, where a justice of the peace named William Wood and the local Reverend Samuel Marshall insisted they repeat under oath what they had witnessed. Stories vary, but some say the following night Mr. Wood and Reverend Marshall accompanied the shepherds, who they had concluded to be poor ignorant men, to the battlefield along with other villagers. They witnessed the same ghostly reenactment themselves and fled home from the scene in utter terror. Some versions say the other villagers witnessed the phantom battle on Christmas Day, and these reports reached the figures in local authority, who promptly set off to Oxford to seek counsel with the king and enlighten him of these mysterious events. Sources suggest that for several nights the whole community lived in fear, with people lying half smothered in their beds, pregnant women becoming seriously ill, and strong, hardy men, being reduced to blubbering wrecks. The king, upon hearing the news, promptly dispatched Colonel Lewis Kirk and 2 army captains named Dudley and Wayneman, along with 3 soldiers, to investigate. They witnessed the reenactment of the bloody battle, and the 3 soldiers who'd fought on that terrible day even recognised the faces of several of the combatants, including Edmund Verney, who died in the conflict. It was decided to try and retrieve some of the battlefield bodies and give them a proper Christian burial to appease the phantom soldiers, but this didn't work. The ghostly soldiers still appeared for some time before fading away. It is said that on October the 23rd, and sometimes on Christmas Day, Edgehill echoes with the sounds of drumming, horses' hooves, muskets, groans, just before the ghostly battle appears in the sky. Middleton Hall in North Warwickshire is supposedly haunted by the apparition of a messenger from the Battle of Edgehill. He rode his horse at great speed to bring news of the battle to the Willoughby family. As he crossed the drawbridge, tragedy struck. The horse, suffering from fatigue, lost its footing, slipped, and both the rider and the horse drowned in the moat below. In 1869, a section of the moat was excavated and human and animal bones were found. It seems Edgehill and its surrounding area is still haunted by those who died so tragically in October 1642. Dating back to 1585, Wilderhope Manor is a fine example of an Elizabethan manor house. Located on the steep slopes of Wenlock Edge, the great ridge that runs for miles across southern Shropshire, this great house has a dark past. In the care of the National Trust and operating as a youth hostel, this Grade 1 listed building was constructed with local limestone for Francis Smallman, whose initials, along with those of his wife Ellen, can be seen in the ceiling's plasterwork. Wilderhope has a beautiful oak staircase, a banqueting room, and even a bridal suite, but this is a house with a heavy atmosphere, as well as a resident ghost. In 1647, the property was owned by Major Thomas Smallman, a staunch royalist officer who had fought gallantly in the King's army. In May 1646, King Charles was captured and handed over to the English Parliament by the Scots, bringing a conclusion to the First English Civil War. King Charles I and the Royalist cause were militarily defeated, but the search for political settlement was just beginning. It proved to be a long and complicated process. For just over a year, from the 13th of November 1647, the King was held as a captive of Parliament on the Isle of Wight, primarily at Carisbrooke Castle. From there, he participated in various negotiations with the English and Scottish parliaments, and there were numerous plots to release the king from prison. Charles did indeed escape briefly, but was recaptured. Spies employed by Parliament accused Major Smallman as being involved in one of the many plots to free the king. The parliamentarians had Major Smallman firmly in their crosshairs. They came calling for Major Smallman at Wilderhope Manor, found the property was empty, but forced entry and fled with some of his valuables. On his return, a livid Major Smallman gave chase. He cornered and killed several of the Roundheads and returned home with his belongings. Shortly afterwards, and vowing revenge, the parliamentarians came a-knocking once more. This time, Major Smallman was home, and he was put under house arrest inside Wilderhope Manor. Whilst the Roundheads discussed his fate, Smallman, fearing for his liberty and life, managed to escape through a secret opening. He raced over to the nearby stables, saddled his horse, and galloped at speed along Wenlock Edge. His captors quickly pursued him, but gazed in amazement at Major Smallman's next move. They watched the Major gallop his horse along the very lip of the precipice. Smallman hauled on the reins, the horse came to a halt, but it lost its footing and plunged over the 200-foot cliff, taking his owner with him. The Roundheads peered over the edge and saw the horse lying dead on the rocks below. Assuming Major Smallman was under the horse's corpse, they left the scene. However, Major Smallman, by some small miracle, was actually alive. In his fall, he'd become entangled in a crab-apple tree jutting out from the cliff face itself. Smallman managed to make it to safety and set off to Shrewsbury on foot to inform the royalists there. The spot where he took his legendary jump is called Major's Leap and is said to be haunted by the Major and his horse. The great black phantom stallion is said to race along the ledge, accompanied by a rider wearing boots and a green cloak. When the phantom leaps over the cliff, it simply vanishes. Wilderhope Manor is also said to be haunted by the same black stallion who gallops out of the manor and along the drive. The mighty spectre is seen with his ears back and his eyes staring wildly. Visitors even hear the horse's hooves as he races past them. The apparition of Thomas Smallman has been seen inside the manor house, dressed spectacularly in full cavalier regalia. Guests sleeping in the little bedroom over the porch have reported seeing him stood at the end of the bed, staring at them in the early hours of the morning. The apparition of Smallman was witnessed in 1968 by a custodian named Mr. Crane, who was painting a ceiling in one of the rooms. He suddenly felt convinced he was being watched. From the corner of his eye, he caught the glimpse of a man standing in the doorway, wearing a green cloak, black tall leather boots, and a hat sporting a large plume of feathers. Mr. Crane, in absolute amazement, plucked up the courage to greet the man and waved him good day. The Phantom Cavalier simply raised his hand in acknowledgement and walked across the room before disappearing into a wall. Another frequently reported apparition is that of a young girl dressed in a white dress, often observed on the manor's staircase or in the upper floor bedrooms. Some believe she may be a member of the Smallman family who died at a young age from a fall on the stairs, though her identity remains a mystery. Ghostly sounds are frequently heard at Wilderhope Manor, with heavy footsteps pacing through empty corridors, disembodied cries, and bedroom doors opening and closing by themselves. Sudden cold spots and the faint sounds of old-fashioned music have been observed by guests, along with the sound of a child laughing. With its fascinating history, it's no wonder Wilderhope Manor is said to be haunted. Standing high on a rocky sandstone outcrop and overlooking the River Wye, Goodrich Castle is a ruined Norman castle close to the border with Wales. William Wordsworth described it as the noblest ruin in Herefordshire, and many historians feel that this is one of the finest examples of English medieval architecture. But it seems Goodrich has several ghosts who still call this impressive castle home. The oldest part of this heavily fortified castle is the Grey Stone Keep, which dates back to the 12th century. This keep is relatively small and was likely used for defence than as living space, but it seems the keep is home to a ghost that predates the Civil War by many centuries. The keep at Goodrich Castle is sometimes referred to as the Macbeth Tower and is said to be haunted by a violent Irish chieftain imprisoned within the dungeons beneath the keep itself. Legend says he died attempting to escape, and his ghost is said to haunt the tower. According to local folklore, a ghostly haze can sometimes be seen in the dungeons, for which there is no explanation, and people have been shocked to hear a disembodied voice whisper vile obscenities and make an abrupt hissing sound. Goodrich Castle became the location of one of the most desperate sieges of the Civil War. Initially, the castle was garrisoned by parliamentarians under Richard Tyler, a local lawyer, and constable of the castle, along with the Earl of Stamford. But from late 1643 or early 1644, it was occupied by a royalist garrison under the command of Henry Lingon. The royalist takeover was vicious, with the royalists burning farms surrounding the castle. By the end of 1645, Goodrich Castle had become the centre of royalist activity in the area. On the night of the 9th of March 1646, the local parliamentarian commander, Colonel John Birch, launched a surprise attack on the castle stables, stealing the horses and setting the buildings alight. 3 months later, Birch returned to Goodrich, this time determined to force Lingon and his garrison to surrender. A ferocious siege ensued. Birch's artillery fire cut off the water supply to the castle from a spring outside and also destroyed the castle's water storage tanks, which meant that the garrison had to rely on the castle's well. The defenders were beginning to struggle. Aware that his standard cannons alone weren't enough to breach Goodrich's massive walls, Birch ordered the casting in a local forge of an enormous mortar or cannon. This mortar was named Roaring Meg and caused significant damage to the castle's northwest tower. On the 31st of July 1646, Lingon surrendered. During the siege, Alice Birch, the niece of the parliamentarian commander, took refuge in the castle with her royalist sweetheart, Charles Clifford. As the outcome of the siege became inevitable, the young lovers decided their fate would not be controlled by rival forces. One night in June, under the cover of darkness, Alice and Clifford mounted his horse, escaped from Goodrich, and broke through the Roundheads' camp. When they made it to the muddy banks of the River Wye, they found the water swollen due to the recent heavy rain. Determined to flee, they attempted to cross the raging river, and sadly the lovers were swept away to their deaths. The star-crossed lovers now live together, united as ghosts on the site. On stormy nights, it is said that the spectral couple can be seen on a phantom white horse wading into the wild waters of the River Wye before suddenly vanishing. Another apparition haunts the River Wye, just south of Hereford, at a village named Hampton Bishop. The ghost of a woman in a small boat is seen travelling towards the riverbank, where she disembarks, cries and sobs loudly, before getting back in the boat and travelling towards Hereford, where she suddenly disappears. This apparition is known locally as the Spectre's Voyage and is regarded as an omen of bad luck. Local boatmen avoid travelling on the river after 8 o'clock at night. Anyone unlucky enough to see the Spectre's Voyage is said to be destined to die soon afterwards. The ghostly lady is thought to be Isabel Chandos, the daughter of the governor of Hereford Castle during the reign of King Edward II. She fell in love with King Edward II's favourite, Hugh Despenser. Despenser told Isabel one night that there was going to be a surprise attack on her town and that she should elope with him. Before leaving with Hugh, she went to warn her town and the attack was foiled. Despenser was captured and hanged for his treachery, and Isabel is said to have been inconsolable after witnessing her true love's execution. Isabel fled the area and sailed down the River Wye to escape. She drowned when her boat capsized in a rapid current. The Ring o' Bells pub is believed to be one of the oldest buildings in Middleton, and certainly one of the most haunted. Its foundations are said to date back to Saxon times, and some say that a Druid temple once stood upon this spot. During the Middle Ages, monks used it as a refectory for brewing potent ale. For centuries, the pub has served as a gathering place for locals and travellers alike. from its humble days as a coaching inn to its current status as a popular haunt for ghost enthusiasts. The Ring a Bells pub is said to be a paranormal hotspot. Numerous visitors and staff members have reported strange experiences and unexplained phenomena. From shadowy figures seen out of the corner of the eye to objects mysteriously moving by themselves, the pub has gained a reputation for being haunted. The most famous ghost said to haunt the property is that of a sad cavalier whose nickname is Edward. Edward, dressed in his royalist finery, has been seen many times by the landlord and his family, both inside and outside of the premises. The ghost is thought to be responsible for loud footsteps and strange noises. He has been known to startle patrons by placing a hand on a person's shoulder. When they turn around, nobody is there. In August 1972, Mr. George Barnett was checking the barrels in the cellar after the pub had closed. A stone was thrown with some force at his shoulder, and Mr. Barnett left the cellar in absolute fear. Was Edward responsible for this action, or are there different energies at work in this pub? Edward is thought to be the son of a local lord who lived at Stanycliffe Hall, now demolished, in the 1600s. The lord and his family were staunch royalists during the Civil War. Middleton became a strong parliamentarian camp, with the Old Boar's Head becoming a base for the Roundheads. A small group of royalists survived in the area, using the cellars of the Ring a Bells as a secret base. One day, someone betrayed the son of Lord Stanycliffe to the Roundheads whilst he was in the pub. He managed to flee in the tunnel linking the pub to the nearby church, but the Roundheads were waiting. They murdered the cavalier and allegedly buried his body under the flagstones of the Ring a Bells pub cellar. Although many items, including helmets, pikes and other artefacts dating from the Civil War, were found under the cellar floor, there have been no human remains found. A stone coffin, without any inscription on it, containing a male skeleton, was discovered beneath the nave of the church in 1869, but there is no evidence to connect it with the Cavalier story. Glasses have fallen from shelves, slid along the bar, and even exploded by their own accord. The landlord's dog will bark in a particular corner of the lounge as if it can see or sense some sort of presence. Inexplicable cold spots are common, and disembodied cries, groans and even grunting sounds have frightened many customers when they least expect it. Oliver Cromwell was an English statesman, politician and soldier, widely regarded as one of the most important figures in British history. He came to prominence during the conflicts, initially as a senior commander in the Parliamentarian Army and latterly as a politician. A leading advocate of the execution of Charles I in January 1649, which led to the establishment of the Commonwealth of England, he ruled as Lord Protector from December 1653 until his death in September 1658. Winston Churchill described Cromwell as a military dictator, while others perceive him as a hero of liberty. He remains a controversial figure to this day due to his use of military force to acquire and retain political power, his role in the execution of Charles I, and the brutality of his 1649 campaign in Ireland, where estimates suggest around 15 to 20% of the pre-1641 population died, either due to fighting, famine or bubonic plague. This 13th century timber-beamed property stands in the centre of Ely in Cambridgeshire. Today it is open to the public and operates as an award-winning attraction with a Civil War exhibition and museum, with interactive displays, costumes and audio tours. But Cromwell's home is said to be haunted by a number of different ghosts. In 1636, Cromwell inherited the house from his maternal uncle, and this was his home for 10 years, before relocating to London. After the execution of King Charles I on the 30th of January 1649, Parliament had attempted to rule the country alone, but many believed it was chaotic. Cromwell was offered the crown, and he turned it down. However, on December the 16th, 1653, he agreed to become Lord Protector and reigned as a king in all but name, becoming the most powerful man in the country. He lived a fine life in luxurious dwellings, including the sprawling Hampton Court Palace. Quite a contrast to his Cambridgeshire house, which he shared with his wife Elizabeth, their 6 surviving children, his 2 sisters, and his mother. The kitchen dates back to 1215 and is where Elizabeth would have cooked the local speciality, eel pie. Nearby is the so-called haunted room, where a wax model of Cromwell depicts his final moments on his deathbed. It seems that this is the most active room in the house, and a number of visitors and staff have experienced unexplained phenomena here. Some sense a brooding male presence, particularly in the bedrooms, and in 2003, a medium complained that the energy completely overwhelmed her. She became so sick she had to leave the room. Only 2 days before, reporters for a local newspaper had attempted an overnight vigil, but fled the house in terror before the night was over. In 1979, a female guest was staying at the home in a bedroom above what is now called the Tithe Office. The property was part of the vicarage of the nearby St Mary's Church, and in Cromwell's time, this is the room where he would have sat to oversee the locals bringing corn and produce in order to pay their tithes or taxes. The guest awoke to find herself standing in the corner of the room with her hands being held tightly in front of her by an invisible male energy. Whilst this presence felt strong and authoritative, she did not feel remotely threatened at all. Suddenly, the male presence let go and the guest returned to sleep. The following day, she noticed clearly visible red finger marks on both of her arms. Did the guest encounter the apparition of Cromwell himself? The parlour is said to be haunted by a young girl who wears a pink bonnet and likes to talk to other young children. A 5-year-old visitor was watching the film in the parlour in the summer of 2010 when the ghostly figure of a girl in a pink bonnet sat next to her and began to speak. The ghostly girl asked if the 5-year-old liked her pink bonnet and then said, "Don't worry, I'm dead. And when you go upstairs, you will see my father, who is also dead." The living girl didn't tell her mother what she had encountered, but when the family made their way to the haunted bedroom, she became upset and terrified. Overcome with fear and expecting to see another ghost, they all had to leave rather suddenly. It was in this room that a member of staff spotted a grey figure while locking up one day. On return to reception, she was told there was nobody else in the building. The most frequent ghostly visitor at Cromwell's house is that of a woman wearing a long blue dress with a set of keys jingling at her waist. Liz Jordan, who worked at the house in 2002, reported, "As I opened the kitchen door, I saw the bottom half of a person in a long blue skirt disappearing into a mist by the wall near the fireplace." Could this be the apparition of Cromwell's wife or mother? Other odd happenings at Cromwell's house include doors being slammed shut by unseen hands, icy cold fingers gripping the back of people's necks, and a spirit presence who likes to untie people's shoes. Pay a visit to Cromwell's home in Ely, and you might come face to face with the ghost of one of the country's most important historical figures. Claydon House, as it stands today, was built between 1751 and 1771, but a house has stood on this site since the 1400s. Claydon has been the ancestral home of the Verney family since 1620, a powerful and wealthy family with links to politics and royalty. Today, Claydon House is owned by the National Trust, but it seems that this magnificent property has a rather unique and clearly identifiable spectre. The ghost of Sir Edmund Verney, who died in 1642, refuses to leave this luxurious home. Born in 1590, Sir Edmund Verney was an English politician, soldier, and favourite of King Charles I. Although he disapproved of some of the king's policies and even alienated his own son Ralph, a committed parliamentarian, Verney's loyalty to the king was quickly rewarded. In the years leading up to the Civil War, Sir Edmund held the prestigious role of standard-bearer to the king. This catapulted his precedence in court, and for many of the more peaceful years, he carried the royal banner on ceremonial occasions. But with the advent of war, Sir Edmund's loyalty to the king became somewhat strained. He told the Earl of Clarendon, "I do not like the quarrel, and do heartily wish that the king would yield and consent to what Parliament desires. My conscience is only concerned with honour and gratitude to follow my master. I have eaten his bread and served him near 30 years, and will not do so base a thing as to forsake him now." It was Edmund Verney who got out the royal battle standard, checked its condition was pristine, and carried it to Nottingham, where on the 22nd of August, 1642, the king raised his royal standard as a signal for his supporters to rally his side. Taking place on Derry Mount, later named Standard Hill, just outside Nottingham Castle, this event effectively marked the beginning of the Civil War. In several dramatic paintings of the historic moment, Charles I is seen heroically raising the flag in Nottingham, bravely sending a strong message to his opponents. But the reality was quite the opposite. The event was almost comedic. It was blowing a gale, pouring with rain, and hardly anyone turned up. People were not impressed. Verney set the standard up, but the wind was so strong it blew it down. The reality was the royal standard had to be dragged out of the mud. Was this an omen of things to come? Just a few months later, in October, the king's army met the opposition at Edgehill. At this point, Verney was the advanced age of 52. Sir Edmund killed 16 parliamentarians on the battlefield. The Roundheads headed for the royal standard, and very quickly Verney was surrounded by a dozen enemy troops. They demanded Sir Edmund surrender and hand over the flag. Sir Edmund refused and declared, "My life is my own, but this standard is the king's, and I cannot surrender it." Overcome, captured and killed by Cromwell's men, Sir Edmund was still clutching the royal standard, a symbol of his unwavering loyalty as he took his last breath. Unable to prise Sir Edmund's fingers from the staff he gripped so firmly, the Roundheads cut off his hand and rode away with the prize. One of the royalist boys saw the banner being taken and shouted, "Captain Smith, they are taking away the standard." Outraged, the royalists gave chase, overwhelmed the Roundheads and retrieved the standard. On returning it to the king, Charles was distraught. He saw the severed hand still gripped to the pole and recognised the distinctive gold ring on one of the fingers. The monarch knew that this gold ring contained a miniature portrait of himself and that Sir Edmund had worn this ring into battle. Whilst his body was never found, his hand was removed and returned to the family crypt in the church next to Claydon House for a proper burial. And then the ghost began to appear. It seems Sir Edmund returns to his home at Claydon and is still seen to this day. He appears not dressed in armour, but in the fine clothes of a mid-17th century nobleman. He is witnessed standing usually near to or on the red staircase. Some say as he walks, he drips blood from the gruesome stump of his right wrist. Sometimes he is seen searching, perhaps looking for his missing limb that he lost for his loyalty to the king. He is a tormented wraith who has been witnessed pacing along corridors with a look of dismay upon his face. His disembodied hand is said to knock on closed bedroom doors at night. But there's another ghost at Claydon House, a far more benign female spirit known as the Grey Lady, who haunts the beautiful Rose Room and who's been seen many times. Guests have been startled to see a lady in a long grey dress standing momentarily before fading from view. When she is seen, a feeling of tranquility and calm in the air is described. She is thought to be Florence Nightingale, whose sister married Sir Henry Verney in 1858. She did much to remodel and restore Claydon House and preserved and catalogued valuable family papers. Florence Nightingale became known as the Lady with the Lamp, having cared with absolute dedication for the wounded men of the Crimean War. She did much to revolutionise nursing, raising the standards of nursing as a profession, both in the UK and abroad. Although Florence Nightingale's home was in Hampshire, she was a frequent visitor to Claydon and often spent many months there at a time. She retained her own bedroom, which to this day contains memorabilia reflecting her life. The Lady in Grey began to haunt shortly after Florence's death in 1910, but nobody can be certain of her identity. Perhaps Florence visits this beautiful home where she spent many happy times, a complete escape from the nightmare of the Crimean War. I hope you enjoyed these ghost stories connected to the English Civil Wars. There were so many haunted locations to choose from, and it seems that barely anywhere in the UK wasn't somehow affected by the conflict. For this video, I decided to focus on locations in England, but there were some really amazing stories from Scotland, Ireland, where some of the most brutal fighting took place, and of course Wales. And I would really like to cover more Civil War stories in the future. Let me know what you think, and I've got some little ghost stories for you today and a few bits and pieces for you to see. I've been reading this brilliant book recently by Diane Purkis, who was actually one of my lecturers many moons ago. I picked this copy up for I think £3.50, and it's fantastic. I am completely gripped, and I feel like I'm really learning a great deal about this very complex time. And I just wanted to read a tiny quote from the text view that perhaps really brings home the impact of this terrible conflict. The armed conflict was also a major event in its own right. Estimates suggest that around 800,000 people in the British Isles died during its course, the majority of them in Ireland. 1 in 4 of all men served in the armies on one side or the other, which suggests that a majority of able-bodied men was involved. The war was not a clean and tidy affair of sabres and dashing cavalry charges. It was a bloody business, largely driven by guns, cannons and muskets and pistols, which at times appear to have combined the worst aspects of the American Civil War and Vietnam. Both sides used soft lead bullets that did terrible damage to flesh. For years afterwards, the London streets were full of one-legged beggars. Cities and castles were razed to the ground. There were atrocities involving civilians, again, especially in Ireland. The war was expensive, and individual families were ruined or made by its sweeping hand. And it's just such an interesting book because it takes the perspectives of ordinary people, people who work in kitchens, people who work on farms, all of this sort of stuff, and paints together a picture of the war from a very different perspective. It's such a great book. I would really recommend it. On to some more little ghost stories. Some of these are Civil War ones, some of them are not, so it just depends what I found on my travels. The first one comes from Burton Dasset in South Warwickshire. If you wander about on the fields just outside of the village, you might meet the apparition of a lady named Jenny. Nobody knows who she is or when she lived, but she carries a lantern that emits a blue or yellow light, which she waves about to attract passers-by. People think she's in trouble, so they go to help, but then Jenny deliberately leads them out to the marshes, the steep banks and ditches, and into the remote wilderness before disappearing. So be warned if you are out and about in Burton Dasset. So there's another ghost story linked to Edgehill, and that's a ghost connected to the royalist Henry Kingsmill from Hampshire. He is said to have rode into battle on an enormous white horse. Henry was killed by a cannonball, and it's actually the ghost of his horse who appears at Edgehill. The beautiful white horse wanders the field, riderless, lonely, and looking for his master. Apparently, on the 23rd of October, people hear phantom horse hooves before he appears as a white, misty shape. Kingsmill was buried at Radway, and his mother, Lady Bridget Kingsmill, created this rather ornate memorial to her son 10 years after the restoration of King Charles II, and 2 years before her own death. And apparently, every year on the anniversary of the battle, a small posy of flowers mysteriously appears on the grave overnight when the church is locked. Spooky. If we just go back to Wilderhope Manor in Shropshire for a moment and Major's Leap, there's another story connected with this area. Close to the cliff edge lies a large outcrop called Ipperkin's Rock. Even on a summer's day, it can be a very lonely place up there, but whatever you do, don't say out loud, "Ipperkin, Ipperkin, keep away with your long chin." The consequences could be fatal. The story behind this dates back to the 13th century when a knight lived in a cave with a gang of robbers. He wasn't a knight saving damsels in distress, quite the opposite really, and he and his men would steal jewels and gold from whoever they could. One night, Ipperkin and his men were sheltering from a violent storm when a bolt of lightning struck the rock overhanging the entrance to the cave, causing it to fall and trapping the men inside, where they starved to death. Ipperkin still haunts the area, and if you are brave enough to provoke Ipperkin and his long chin, he'll rush out from the cave and push you over the cliff edge to your death. You have been warned. I do not want my viewers turning into a ghost anytime soon. And now I'm going to tell you the story of a haunted pub in Newcastle called the Old George. And this beloved pub is located down a cobbled lane called Old George Yard and is thought to be one of the oldest pubs in Newcastle and dates back to about 1582. This pub, which was formerly a coaching inn, was frequented by none other than King Charles I when he was being held in an open prison nearby. His apparition is said to haunt the pub, and there's a room at the inn named after him. There's also a chair where he allegedly sat to sup his ale, but this is in fact a reproduction. The ghost of King Charles I has been blamed for heavy footsteps across the wooden floors and has even been seen standing with his head intact at the bar itself. And my final little story is from the village of Castle Ashby in Northamptonshire. The rather impressive Falcon Hotel stands on the site that used to be a blacksmith's forge during the Civil War. The blacksmith's name was Arthur, and he was a royalist, and he refused to shoe a group of parliamentarians' horses. He also refused to reveal the location of an important royalist landowner that they were looking for. Outraged by this, the Roundheads hanged Arthur from a walnut tree in the grounds. Now, there is still a walnut tree in the gardens, but nobody knows if it's the same tree that was used for the hanging. But apparently Arthur's apparition has been seen in the grounds and in the hotel's lobby wearing a leather apron, and he's been blamed for moving bottles in the bar and the occasional smashed glass. And then I've got some small bits and pieces to look at with you. The first is a set of stamps. Now, these stamps were issued in 1992 to commemorate the 350th anniversary of the Battle of Edgehill. We've got 4 stamps. We've got On the top left, a pikeman, then we've got a drummer, bottom left a musketeer, and we've got a standard bearer. And I love these little drawings from the Civil War, and I love stamps, they're so pretty. These were issued by the Royal Mail, but this is a set from the National Army Museum. And then we've got a little postcard inside with some quite interesting writing, which I'll leave you to have a look at in your own time. And then I've got a replica of a Charles I sixpence, which would have been made of silver, probably minted at the Tower of London. The Latin translates to say, Charles, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, France and Ireland. Now, the France part threw me a bit, but this reflects his claim to the throne of France, which he didn't actually rule. And then on the reverse, we've got the royal coat of arms and a shield, and in the Latin translates to, I reign under the auspices of Christ. And that is Charles's belief that he was only answerable to God. And I just think these coins, the actual real ones, go for thousands and thousands of pounds. Obviously, I've just got a replica. And this is an Oliver Cromwell coin, and the Latin on the front says, Oliver, by the grace of God, Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland and Ireland. And then on the inside, the inscription reads from Latin, Peace is sought by war. Now, the Cromwell coins are extremely rare because obviously they weren't made for that long. Many, many thousands of pounds yet again. So that's obviously why I've just got a replica. But this is not a replica. This is my King Charles II farthing from 1672. So we've got the portrait of King Charles II wearing a wreath of a crown on his head, and he has a moustache, and he's wearing what looks like armour. The lettering reads, Charles, son of Charles, referring to Charles I. And then we've got Britannia facing to the left, holding a branch and a shield, and around the edge are the milling bands to prevent the coin being clipped. It was minted at the Tower of London, and it would have been made of pure copper. It's 22.5 millimetres in diameter, and in 1672 this would have been the equivalent of about 50p today. And they became withdrawn from circulation in 1869. You could still go out and spend these coins in 1869, and I absolutely love it. It's one of my absolute favourite items that I own. I was going to cover the Old Star Inn in York, which has some very important Civil War links. The reason I didn't do this is because actually recently a good friend of my channel, Don't Scare Claire, covered it in brilliant detail in a video just a few weeks ago. So I would really say to you, please go and have a look at her video. It's excellent. She's very thorough. She goes into depth. She's a really engaging presenter. She is really thorough with her research. And I think if you are interested in ghosts and macabre stories and all things a bit spooky, please check out her channel. It's very, very good. And I think you'll really enjoy it. And check out her video on the Old Star Inn. It is creepy. And if you like Civil War stuff, it's definitely right up your street. I'll leave a link in the description box below so that you can go and have a look at that video. Please do. I've just got two little postcards for you today. One is from Cromwell's house in Ely. Check out that lady sat on the bench. I wonder if she is a ghost. She might be by now. Oh, that's a bit of a nasty thing to say. She's probably somebody's gran. Anyway, let's have a little look at this one. And I think this is from 1975. We've decided to take a trip up the River Ouse with 2 friends and 3 dogs. It's great fun so far. Hope you are well. Love, Joyce and Dom. Goodness me, I hope they've got a decent boat. 3 dogs. And this is a postcard from Goodrich Castle, and it's dated 1904. Dear C, just another postcard for your collection. This is one of the many places we have been to see this holiday. Does it not remind you of Knaresborough? Hope you have returned quite well from Liverpool. Heard great, and then you have to go over to the front. Great accounts of your afternoon on the 12th. What do you think? Sincere regards, Harry. So that's all from me for this video today. I hope you enjoyed the Ghost of the English Civil War, and please feel free to comment, please like and subscribe, and don't forget I am on Instagram if you want to come and have a look. Take care guys, and I'll see you on the next one.